a locked room, and a window that never opened. Welcome to Deadly Puzzle. I am your host, Edric Vale. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Your voices make this community thrive. I can't wait to read them. It was a damp Tuesday morning, the sort that seemed to have been wrung out of a grey cloth and left to drip over Paris. From the window of his office at the Quai des Orfèvres, Maigret watched the river below, dull and sluggish under the drizzle. The clock on the far wall said 10:15, but it might as well have been any hour. Time passed differently in such weather, without urgency. He sat behind his desk, his pipe resting cold in the ashtray. The tobacco pouch lay open beside it, but he hadn't yet bothered to fill the bowl. His mind was adrift, not exactly on a case, and not exactly on nothing. Just floating between thoughts the way smoke floats between draughts. Down in the courtyard, a young constable crossed from the gatehouse to the steps, his cap pulled low, water dripping from the brim. Maigret's eyes followed him without much interest. These quiet moments, when there was no pressing matter, had their own weight. One could think, or not think, and no one would notice the difference. The telephone on his desk did not ring. The door did not open. He reached for the tobacco, filling the pipe slowly, pressing it down with his thumb. There was satisfaction in the ritual, in the sound of the dried leaves against the wood, in the faint, sweet smell. Outside, a boat hooted somewhere upriver, its call muffled by the damp air. He thought vaguely of lunch. Madame Maigret might have stew ready if he returned home by noon. He pictured her, in her neat kitchen on Boulevard Richard Lenoir, lifting the lid from the pot, the steam curling toward her face, a small comfort against the endless grey. It was at this moment, when he was least engaged with the day, that there was a knock on his door. "Come in," he said, without moving. Inspector Janvier entered, bringing with him a faint gust of wet air from the corridor. He had his hat in one hand, droplets on the brim, and a folded sheet of paper in the other. His face was serious, but not tense, something unusual, not urgent. "From the local station at Rue de Charenton," Janvier said, placing the paper on the desk. "A woman there insists something's wrong in her building." Maigret looked at the paper without picking it up. "A theft?" "No," Janvier said. "Not exactly. She says one of her neighbours, an old man, lives alone, hasn't opened his window in 3 days, and he always opens it, rain or shine, first thing in the morning. She's certain something's happened to him." Maigret lit his pipe, drew in the smoke, and exhaled slowly, letting it rise toward the ceiling. He looked again at the paper, but still didn't touch it. "Did she try knocking?" "Yes." No answer, but she swears she's heard movement inside. The idea sat in the air between them. An unopened window in a street where habits were noticed, where shutters creaked and curtains twitched. Maigret could see it already. The narrow courtyard, the rows of small, over-furnished rooms, the smell of cabbage from someone's lunch. "Send her home," he said finally. "Tell her I'll come by this afternoon." Janvier hesitated, as if expecting him to delegate the matter. But Maigret had already turned back to the river. The unopened window lodged itself in his mind like a small stone in a shoe. Nothing dramatic, just enough to make walking uncomfortable. It was not a case. Not yet. But in Paris, Maigret knew, it was often the smallest things that whispered of trouble. By the time he rose to put on his overcoat, the drizzle had thickened into a fine, steady rain, and the thought of the Rue de Charenton, with its quiet, narrow facades, felt heavier in his pocket than his pipe. He left the Quai des Orfèvres with the slow caution of a man who knows the weather is a second presence at his side. On the Pont Saint-Michel, the river looked thicker than water should be, as if the city had dissolved a little into it. Rain tapped on the brim of his felt hat, gathered, slid, and fell again. He drew on his pipe once, more to steady his mood than to taste the smoke, and walked without hurry toward the Rue de Charenton, as the damp made his coat heavier by degrees. By the time he turned into the street, the rain had settled into that persistent, even pattern that makes it feel like a condition rather than an event. The facades were narrow and respectable in their way, with bits of ornament that had once tried to be cheerful and had now mostly given up. He stopped opposite the building from Janvier's paper, 3 stories above a ground-floor shop that sold sewing notions and buttons in glass jars. The shop's blind was half lowered, beaded with droplets. Above it, a recessed door with an iron knocker, a little brass plate dulled by fingerprints, and a dull smell of floor polish that came and went with the draught when someone entered or left. He stood for a moment on the pavement, pipe stem between his teeth, and looked up. The windows were all ordinary windows, but habits make their own lines on such a block. On the second floor, front, a square of lace usually caught the morning air, perhaps snapped by a hand and pinned back to let a little light in. Today, it lay flat, untroubled. The rain ran over the glass in narrow veins. He could see almost nothing inside, only a dim impression of a lampshade, a table edge. He went in, pushing the door with the habitual pressure that expects a second resistance. The smell of the entrance hall was a mix of cabbage, damp wool, and something lemon-scented that someone had used to wipe the banister. On the left, a row of letterboxes the size of folded newspapers, with names hand-lettered on card: Brossard, Delcourt, Mezzaretta, Colin. The last had a clean, even handwriting, the final N like a fence. "Monsieur!" The voice came from the concierge's lodge, which was hardly a room at all, more a glass-fronted cupboard with a chair, a stove, and a calendar showing a bull in a Spanish ring. The concierge was a woman of about 50, square-bodied in a cardigan with a missing button. She had a way of looking that checked what your boots had dragged in before it checked your face. "You're the inspector?" Maigret. He set his hat on the edge of the lodge, which seemed to please her in a way she wouldn't show. "She's gone for bread," the concierge said, meaning the woman who had complained. "Madame Vasseur, but if it is about Monsieur Colin, I told them already at the post, it isn't normal. It rarely is when someone notices," Maigret said. He glanced to the stairwell. The wooden steps had been polished recently, but not so well that the old dents were gone. "He lives on the second. Front. 2 rooms and a kitchen no bigger than this." Her eyes moved to the window, where the rain wrote in tiny slants. "He opens the window, always before the church bell. He eats his coffee with a sugar lump, and at noon, he goes out for a walk with his umbrella, even if the sun is shining." She paused. "He didn't go on Sunday, nor yesterday, nor today. Is he ill? If he is a man who never told a soul. He's a quiet man. He does not get visited. He does not ask for advice." She said it as if such men had their own category of trouble. "And you've knocked?" "Knocked. I've nearly worn the wood through. I used the master key too, but the bolt is thrown from inside, and that has no kindness for my key." She adjusted her cardigan, as if the subject made her neatness doubtful. Madame Vasseur thought she heard someone moving, but I think it is the neighbour's baby coughing. In this building, everything is heard twice. He nodded. "May I see the door?" She came out of the lodge with a set of keys that clinked softly and led him up the steps. On the first landing, a pram blocked half the space. A sewing machine stood in the open doorway of a flat, and from within came the steady, petulant sound of the needle and a woman's breath keeping time. On the second landing, the air was close and fragrant with boiled potatoes. The door to the front flat had a metal plate around the keyhole and a bolt above. A small bought wreath, the kind that keeps its colour forever, hung from a ribbon. He touched the bolt gently. The thin bar of metal gave a little under his finger but held. He put his ear to the wood. Behind it there was the silence of rooms where no one wants to make a sound. "It's strange," the concierge said, almost to herself. "Saturday, I saw his umbrella under his arm when he came back. And Sunday, I did not see it by the stand. But he didn't go out, I think. So either he is a man who moves umbrellas in the night, or he Had visitors. Visitors, Maigret repeated, watching her face rather than listening to the words. The concierge hesitated. Her mouth had already said more than she intended. You know oneself, she said, falling back on the impersonal. Men bring someone to fix a stove, to look at a pipe, to read a meter. I didn't see anyone. I was in the back with the wash. But the umbrella, it was there, then not. And his post? She spread her hands. 2 circulars. No letter. He is a man who pays his bills before the stamp dries. A woman's steps climbed the stairs behind them, brisk. The rhythm of someone with a purpose that doesn't easily get distracted. She arrived with a paper bag growing damp at one corner. Madame Vasseur. She was small, white hair netted flat, cheeks a colour that could be from health or from the cold outside, and eyes that had decided long ago to distrust anything that moved too softly. I went quickly, she said to Maigret, as if he had been waiting exactly for her, which, in a way, he had. It's good you're here. He is alone in there, and I tell you, something is wrong. How do you know he is alone, madame? Maigret asked, and saw the small inward start that people make when a question is not the one they expected. Because he is a man who would not have anyone, she said, weaker. He is particular. He makes his bed like a soldier. He has a little tray where he folds the napkin in 4. When he opens the window, he opens it just so. She showed with her hands an exact angle. Have you known him long? 3 years, she said. I notice everything from my kitchen. Not to gossip, to keep a house from going to the dogs. They were all standing, in that Parisian way, in a patch of air where lives have slipped past for decades, and the rain made a calm pattern just outside the window at the turn of the stair. Maigret looked at the sill there. The drops formed a line and fell. On the sill of the front window across the street, a thin black cat sat on its own patient tail. He noticed these things without deciding to, the way one notices when a story is told with the same 3 words in different orders. Has anyone smelled gas? He asked. No, the concierge said. And I am a nose for gas. Ask anyone. Good. He crouched and looked at the line of light under the door, although there was none, then ran a finger along the jamb. A faint smear came away. Not dust, not quite. More the faint shine of something that had been wiped with a cloth recently. He held the finger up without explaining it to them, and then put it away in his pocket, as if to keep the print like a thought that shouldn't yet be spoken. He straightened. We won't break the door, he said, and the concierge looked half relieved, half disappointed. Not yet. I want a locksmith to come and someone from the local post to witness. Would you call? The concierge went down, with her clinking keys, proud at once to have something to do. Madame Vasseur stood straighter, as if she'd been validated. Maigret walked up one more flight, to the 3rd floor, where the corridor was narrower, and the soles of his feet felt the thinness of the ceiling beams under the linoleum. In the back flat, a young man with ink on his fingers opened his door a crack, then a little more when he saw the inspector's face. His hair was of that careful disarray that takes longer than neatness. You are a student? Maigret asked. Teacher, almost, the young man said. I give lessons. Latin, you've seen Monsieur Collin in the last days? At his window, on Friday. He waved with 2 fingers. He doesn't like to do too much with the hand. On Sunday, I heard a chair move. At what time? In the afternoon. It was a Sunday sound, if you understand. Maigret nodded. Sunday sounds have their own shape, the city arranged differently, as if resting on a different set of bones. Anyone else on the landing hear anything? The seamstress. She hears everything, but only tells if you buy a button. The young man smiled a little, then stopped, ashamed of levity, and looked down at his ink. Back on the 2nd floor, he stood once more before the door to the front flat, and felt the way the corridor had its own weather. Warmer near the ceiling, cooler where the stone met the linoleum. A draught that sneaked in Not under the door, but from somewhere near the window that gave onto the stairwell. He crossed to that window, pushed it a little. It moved reluctantly, sticking where paint had been too generous. He looked down. The street was a grey film where shapes swam lazily. A woman with a headscarf, the button shopkeeper adjusting the blind, a policeman idling under a doorway to smoke. When the locksmith arrived, a man whose moustache held as much rain as his coat, Maigret shook his hand, as if the locksmith too belonged to the building, which he probably did, called for births and deaths and lost keys. The man put his leather bag down softly, as if not to wake someone, and took out tools that were also quiet. "You see this plate?" the locksmith said to the assembled corridor. "It's old. It has a history of being opened." He said it without malice. He meant only that doors, like people, learn the handling they've had. Maigret let the man begin but kept a hand out, a slow gesture. "Not yet." He looked at the bolt again. "Before we do it by the book, let us do it by the window." He turned back to the stairwell window. "Does the fire ladder reach the façade?" he asked the concierge, who had returned with the station agent, a thin man who carried his authority like a coat 2 sizes too big. "There is none," she said. "We had it removed last year because of boys." "Then by the street," Maigret said, more to himself. "Not to force, only to look." He went down to the pavement, under his hat, and crossed to the opposite side, the rain greeting him like an old acquaintance. From there, the second-floor window showed a reflection of the dull sky and the dark interior beyond. He stood very still and drew on his pipe and waited for the next small thing to make itself known. Across the glass, life inside had a way of showing itself if you didn't ask directly. He noticed, after a moment, the ashtray. It sat on the windowsill inside, a simple glass one with a chip at the rim. It had been set there as if to cool, perhaps. A narrow paper end protruded over the edge. Not a cigarette exactly, but a match that had been allowed to burn and then set down. It was a silly detail to fix on, and he knew it was silly. But in rooms where people are alone, the silly things are the ones that speak. He lifted his eyes and saw something else. The curtain had a crease near the hook, a crease that you get when you pull a thing aside and then let it fall too quickly. And at the corner of the pane, where the putty had cracked, a tiny triangle of paper had been wedged, as people wedge a coin to stop a rattle. The paper was white in a way that belonged to envelopes. It was very small and very deliberate. He went back in, up the stairs, and took his hat off, which made a different silence, a more domestic one. Madame Vasseur was fussing with her paper bag, which had broken. Potatoes had made dark circles on the wrapping. The locksmith looked at him with that particular patience workmen keep for men who can't decide. "We'll open," Maigret said finally, carefully. "And first, we call out. If he answers, we go away and let him tell us we are fools." The locksmith nodded, set to work with a slender tool that found its way into a space it belonged in. There was a minute of the kind of noise that is less noise than determination. Then a click, a collective breath, and Maigret put his palm flat to the door and pushed it open the way you open a book at a page you're not sure you want to read. The smell came first, a dry, stale mixture, not of rot, but of time held too long in a box. No gas, no alarm, only that human odour of a room where curtains have not been moved and the air has got used to itself. He did not step over the threshold. He stood and said, "Monsieur Collin," in a tone that could have belonged to a man asking a favour. There was no answer, but somewhere a floorboard decided to tell him it could creak. He listened to the room like a doctor who listens to the chest before he lifts the stethoscope. He was aware of the concierge's breath just behind his shoulder, and of Madame Vasseur, who had pressed her mouth into a hard line to keep from saying the thing that would make it so. "Stay here," he said, and entered. On a small table near the window, the ashtray lay as he had seen it. Next to it, a saucer with a sugar lump half melted to the porcelain. On the windowsill, The triangle of paper wasn't a wedge after all, but the corner of a letter stuck behind the putty, as if someone had been interrupted and then decided against finishing the job. He did not touch it. The bed had the flatness of a bed, made by someone who makes beds in the same order every morning. The umbrella stand in the corner was empty. In the kitchen, a cup had been set upside down to dry, and it had left a ring on the draining board that was now dry itself, which told a story of hours, not minutes. In the other room, the armchair near the stove had a blanket folded over the back in a perfect square. Near it, a pair of slippers sat with their toes slightly apart, as if the man had taken his feet out without looking down. He went back to the corridor and stood with them, wet felt in his hand, pipe in the other. "He isn't here," he said. "Not in the way we mean." He saw the way Madame Vasseur's face went through 3 small changes before settling, and the concierge, who had prepared a little cry and now felt cheated of it, swallowed instead. "What now?" the locksmith asked, closing his bag softly. "Now we wait a little," Maigret said. "We breathe his air, we look without moving anything, and we let the room talk." He turned to the station agent. "And you, if you please, will note that the door was opened with a witness and without damage. We're merely neighbours who worry." He went back inside, and this time he closed the door behind him, leaving the others in the corridor. The rain beat its small, even rhythm on the glass, and the air in the room took him in, as if he were a piece of furniture newly delivered and not yet placed. He stood without moving, and, as sometimes happens, the small, wrong thing revealed itself because he had offered it the courtliness of his stillness. The armchair, the cushion had a dent on the left, deeper than the right, but on the floor the threadbare carpet showed 2 darker ovals from the slippers, close to each other, pointing straight. He frowned a little, almost amused with himself. It wasn't much, and yet it was like that unopened window, enough to make walking uncomfortable. He went to the window and looked at the letter corner again. The paper was cheap and white. The edge was clean. He thought of the bolt, wiped. He thought of the umbrella that had been somewhere and then nowhere. Outside, the rain went on with its patient work. He filled his pipe again but did not light it. He was not in a hurry. The room did not want him to hurry. Somewhere in the building, the sewing machine stopped, and the sudden absence of its petulance made a space that could hold a voice if one decided to speak. He waited, and the case, if it wanted to be one, began to breathe. Maigret stayed in the armchair a few minutes longer than courtesy would require if a man were alive and in the next room. The dent in the cushion, the slipper's exact position, the sugar lump left to melt. They were all still there, silent witnesses, and he had no desire to move them about too soon. A room that has been recently abandoned is like a pond disturbed by a stone. At first, all is ripples, but if one waits, the surface clears, and the shape of what lies beneath becomes visible. He rose slowly, feeling the boards underfoot, some firm, some with that faint give of wood that has known too many damp seasons. A soft draught passed by his ankles. It didn't seem to come from the window, which was shut tight, nor from under the door. He turned toward the kitchen again, this time crouching to look at the baseboards and the narrow gap where the linoleum didn't quite meet the wall. It was there the air moved, the way it moves in stairwells when a door somewhere below opens for a second and closes again. On the small counter, the cup remained inverted. The handle was chipped, the glaze slightly crazed with age. Beside it stood a jar of coffee, the lid half screwed on. He took it between his fingers. It was cold, as was the kettle beside it. In the sink, a teaspoon lay with a faint line of sugar still clinging to the bowl, sticky but not wet. Someone had interrupted themselves between sweetening and drinking. He went back to the main room and stood before the umbrella stand again. The bare space inside it seemed larger than it ought to, as though absence had its own weight. On the wall nearby, a peg was empty, the dust outline of a hat faint against the wallpaper. He glanced at the wardrobe, an old upright thing, its mirror clouded with age, and opened it gently. Inside hung two jackets, one dark blue, the other a lighter grey, the sort a man wears for errands or to the cafe. The lighter one had an empty sleeve turned slightly inside out, as though it had been pulled in haste. He shut it again, without touching the rest. The triangle of paper at the window caught his eye once more. This time he went to it, eased it free with care so as not to tear it. It was indeed the corner of an envelope, the gum unlicked, the flap unsealed. He turned it over. No writing on the outside. When he slipped the flap open with his thumb, there was only a scrap of paper inside, smaller than a visiting card. On it, in cramped, deliberate letters, was a single word: demain, tomorrow. The word had no address, no signature, no context. He held it a moment longer, then replaced it exactly as he'd found it, pressing the corner back into the crack in the putty. If the room wanted to keep its secret, he would let it, for now. From the corridor, the murmured voices of the concierge and Madame Vasseur reached him. Two women trading theories in the low register of people who both know and don't know what they're talking about. He opened the door and stepped out. Their eyes lifted at once, both pairs sharp with expectation. "Well?" Madame Vasseur demanded, with the entitlement of one who has brought a matter to the police. "He's not here," Maigret said simply. "But he left in a way that doesn't fit him. You both know his habits. They're neat, predictable." Something interrupted them. "Then where is he?" the concierge asked, folding her arms tight against the damp draught in the corridor. "That," Maigret said, "is what we will find out." He left them there and went down to the street. The rain had not stopped, but had changed its texture. Finer now, more like a mist that softened edges. Across the way, the shopkeeper in the button store was leaning on her counter, staring at nothing in particular. He stepped inside. The shop smelled of starch and cotton thread. Small drawers lined the walls, each with a faded label: Boutons nacre, Boutons cuir, Boutons bois. The woman behind the counter had the look of someone accustomed to long, uneventful hours. "Monsieur Collin," Maigret began, as if the name were part of an order. "You know him?" "From sight. He passes. He never comes in. Buys his thread at the big shop on the boulevard, I think." She glanced toward the rain. "You're the police?" "Something like that," Maigret said. "Have you seen him since Saturday?" Her brow furrowed. "Number. But Saturday morning, early, he walked by with a small suitcase, not large enough for travel, but more than for shopping. He didn't look in. I thought perhaps he was going to the laundry." "Which way?" She pointed to the right, toward the river end of the street. "And then in the afternoon, I thought I saw him again. But maybe it wasn't him. The coat was the same, but he had no case. And the hat, it was different. A bowler, not his felt." "You're sure it was the same man?" She shrugged. The kind of shrug that means I won't swear to it in court, but I'd be surprised if it wasn't. The street was busy. There was a wedding at the mairie. He thanked her and stepped out again, turning toward the river. The street narrowed after 2 blocks, the buildings leaning in slightly, as if for warmth. He stopped at the small laundry the shopkeeper had likely meant. A steamy place with windows fogged over, the scent of soap and damp cloth spilling onto the pavement. Inside, 2 young women worked at ironing boards, their arms moving in a slow rhythm. He asked after Monsieur Collin. One shook her head, the other bit her lip in thought. "He hasn't been in since last Thursday," the second said. "Always came on Thursdays, brought 2 shirts and took 2 back. Never more, never less." "Did he bring anything unusual last time?" A brief pause, then a nod. "A raincoat I'd never seen before, darker than his usual one, with a tear at the hem. He didn't ask for it to be mended." "And is it still here?" "No, he picked it up Friday morning. But it was still damp. We'd had trouble with the boiler. I told him so. He said it didn't matter. He wouldn't be wearing it long." Maigret let that sit in his mind for a moment, the way a pebble sits in the palm before being dropped back, into a pocket. He thanked them and went back into the rain. The quay was only a few streets away now, and he walked toward it without deciding to. The air carried the faint, briny scent of the river, mingled with the metallic tang of wet tram rails. On the bridge, a man in a heavy coat leaned over the parapet, staring into the water. Maigret slowed as he passed, his instinct noting the stillness, but the man's face was unfamiliar. The stillness that of someone simply letting the rain do its work. Back at the Quai des Orfèvres, his office was much as he had left it, pipe ash in the tray, the view of the sluggish Seine, the coat stand with its reliable presence. He took off his hat, shook the rain from it, and sat. From a drawer, he took a blank pad and wrote 4 short lines. No window opened. Umbrella missing. Suitcase. Saturday morning. Demain. He looked at the word on the page for some time. It was not a threat. It was not quite a promise. It was simply a point in time. And the day after it had been written, the man had not been seen. Janvier appeared in the doorway, hat still on, cheeks reddened from the wet. "Anything to it?" he asked. "There might be," Maigret said. "See if anyone on the street remembers him on Saturday afternoon. After the merry wedding. Ask about the suitcase." "Shall I bring them in?" "Number go to them. It's a street where people talk more freely on their own ground." When Janvier had gone, Maigret leaned back and lit his pipe. The first draw of smoke filled the office with a comfort that had nothing to do with the case, and yet made it easier to sit with the case's silence. Outside, the rain thickened again, and somewhere in the city, a man named Colin had gone on foot, without his umbrella, carrying something that required a suitcase but not a train ticket, and leaving behind a room that still held the warmth of his last hour there. It was not yet a crime, but it was no longer nothing. The next morning, Paris was the same shade of grey as the evening before, only flatter, as if someone had pressed the whole city between 2 sheets of damp paper. From his kitchen table, Maigret stirred his coffee slowly, watching the swirl die in the cup. Madame Maigret moved quietly behind him, the clink of crockery and the faint smell of toast filling the room with a domestic order that sat in sharp contrast to the empty flat on Rue de Charenton. She had asked no questions the night before, only glanced at the rain on his coat when he came in. Now, without turning from the stove, she said, "You've been thinking about it all night." He made a non-committal sound, sipping his coffee. "About what?" "The window that was never opened." She placed a plate of toast beside him, as if it were part of the answer. People who change their habits don't do it for no reason, especially alone. He smiled faintly, knowing she hadn't meant it as advice. Still, it lodged, somewhere in his thoughts as he put on his coat, the warmth of breakfast left behind. The rain had lightened to a mist again, the kind that turns overcoats clammy without seeming to fall at all. At the Rue de Charenton, the concierge greeted him with the satisfaction of someone whose suspicion had gained a certain official weight overnight. She informed him, in a voice just shy of triumphant, that Monsieur Collin had not returned. "Not a creak on the stairs, not a key in the lock," she said. "And if anyone came in the night, they would have had to pass my lodge." The corridor outside Colin's flat was just as he had left it, the smell of boiled vegetables replaced now by a faint scent of floor polish. He stepped inside the flat again, this time with the deliberate tread of someone listening for an echo. Nothing had been moved. The ashtray still sat on the sill, the sugar lump on the saucer now hardened into a pale crust. He went to the wardrobe, checked the pockets of the jackets without disturbing the hang. One yielded a bus ticket, folded once, for a journey from Gare de Lyon to Mélin, dated 2 weeks ago. He put it back and shut the wardrobe. It wasn't enough to say where Colin had gone, but it was enough to prove he sometimes left Paris, even if no one in the building thought he did. He glanced again at the umbrella stand, still empty, and then at the triangle of paper in the window. Demain. Tomorrow. That word sat differently now, with another day already passed since it was written. Back in the corridor, The seamstress on the first floor was setting up her machine. She looked up at him without pausing her threading. "You're still here about Monsieur Collin?" "Yes," Maigret said. "You've lived here long?" 7 years. She pulled the thread through the needle's eye. "Long enough to know when someone's gone before they've gone." "What do you mean?" She smiled without warmth. "Some people prepare to leave, not packing. I mean here." She tapped her temple. "They take smaller steps. They stand at the door longer before locking it. They give things away." "Did he give anything away?" "A book, last week. Old detective novel. Said he didn't want it anymore. He didn't say why." "Who did he give it to?" "Me." She nodded toward a shelf where a single volume lay apart from the others. He picked it up, a cheap edition, the spine cracked. Inside the front cover was an inscription in neat, even writing. To L for the summer afternoons. C. "You know who L is?" She shook her head, already turning back to her machine. "Not from here." He left her to her work and went down to the street. The air was damp and heavy. The light had the tired quality of early afternoon, though it was still morning. He walked toward the river end of the street, the direction the button shopkeeper had seen Colin take with the suitcase. At the corner cafe, 2 men sat over small glasses of beer, their coats unbuttoned. The smell of Gauloises hanging in the air. Maigret ordered a coffee at the counter and, in the way he often did, let his presence become part of the background before speaking. Eventually, he asked the barman if he remembered a man with a small suitcase on Saturday morning. "Dark coat? Hat pulled low," the barman said, wiping the counter. "Yes, he came in here first. Sat where you're standing now. Didn't order a drink. Asked if he could leave the case for an hour." "And did he?" "He left it behind the counter. Said he was going to meet someone at the bridge. Came back half an hour later without the hat. Took the case and left." Maigret stirred his coffee without drinking it. "Alone, both times." "Yes, but—" The barman hesitated, then leaned slightly closer. "When he came back, his shoes were wet. It hadn't rained, you remember. The street was dry by then. I thought maybe he'd been down by the river." It was enough for Maigret to finish his coffee and leave a coin on the counter. Outside, he crossed to the bridge. The river slid past, indifferent, its surface broken only by the occasional swirl near the embankment steps. A gull wheeled low, crying once before vanishing downstream. He went down the stone steps to the quay. The smell of the river was sharper here, edged with the faint sourness of wet rope. A lone fisherman sat on an upturned crate, line trailing into the water, eyes fixed on nothing. "You're here most days?" Maigret asked, stopping a few feet away. The man looked up, squinting. "If the weather lets me." "Did you see a man here on Saturday morning? Small suitcase, dark coat, bowler hat the second time?" The fisherman's gaze drifted over the water. "I saw a man standing right there." He pointed to the edge of the quay, near where the steps ended. "He wasn't fishing, just looking." Then another man came up, younger, lighter coat, and they talked. Couldn't hear what. The one with the case opened it, showed something. The other nodded, took it, and walked off toward the Pont Marie. The first man stayed a bit, then went up the steps. Maigret lit his pipe, the first match snuffed by the damp air, the second catching. "You notice anything about the second man?" Tall, hair slicked back, moved quickly, like he had somewhere to be, didn't look back. It was enough to sketch the scene in his mind. The unopened window, the missing umbrella, the suitcase, the quiet exchange by the river. None of it explained demain, but it began to suggest that tomorrow had been meant for someone else as much as for Colin. Back at the Quai des Orfèvres, he found Janvier waiting. "The wedding guests at the mairie remember him," Janvier reported, "or someone like him. Dark coat, but no hat. He was standing outside, as if waiting for someone who never came. Left after 10 minutes. Anything about a suitcase? One person says yes, one says no. Hard to be certain in that crowd. Maigret nodded, letting the pieces shift in his head without yet forcing them together. He went to the window, looking out over the river. The drizzle had returned, softening the outlines of the bridges. Somewhere in the damp folds of the city, a man named Colin had arranged to meet someone by the river, handed over something from a suitcase, and then stepped back into his quiet, precise life, just long enough to disappear from it entirely. It was still not enough for a report, but enough for him to know that what had happened in that flat on Rue de Charenton was no accident of habit. It was the first move in something that had not yet finished, and tomorrow, whatever it had meant, was getting closer. By late afternoon, the river had the colour of pewter, and the rain had thinned to a breath that left the stone darker without making a sound. Maigret let the day move him as slowly as it liked. He went first, not to the station, but back to Rue de Charenton, where the concierge received him with a nod that said she had been expecting him, even if he had not promised to come. Buildings like these prefer a rhythm. Arrivals outside it make the walls pay attention. On the landing, the air held the same closed, faintly sweet smell, as if the room across the door had exhaled once and then thought better of it. He eased the door open with the locksmith's work still unshowy and intact, and stood just inside, hat in hand. The sugar crust on the saucer had turned a dry white, like frost. The ashtray on the sill had been nudged a finger's width, unless his memory played tricks. He crouched and looked at the dust around it. There was a lighter semicircle where the glass had sat. It had been moved, but perhaps only by the draught when he had opened the door yesterday. He didn't correct the thought. He let it sit among the others. He took off his overcoat and hung it on the peg with the faint hat outline. The peg took the weight with the resigned sound certain bits of wood make in old apartments, a small memory creak. He did not touch the letter corner at the window. He looked at it from where he was, the way one looks at a cat one does not want to startle. Demain. Tomorrow. But today had already made itself at home. From the courtyard below came the clatter of a bucket and an old cough that turned into a laugh. Somewhere a child banged a spoon. He sat in the armchair, very lightly, not to spoil the language of its dent, and waited. A room, like a man, says different things if you don't interrupt it. He filled his pipe, tamped the tobacco, forgot to strike the match, remembered, and struck it anyway, but didn't bring it to the bowl. The match burned out against his fingernail. He became aware of another small wrongness. The umbrella stand was empty, yes. He had seen it yesterday. But beside it, where the wall met the floorboard, a damp thread had dried into a darker line, the way water leaves a signature after it has gone. He touched it and smelled the finger. River, not rain. Not today's, but Saturday's, when the barman had said the shoes were wet though the street was dry. He stood, imagining the umbrella there, dripping, then not. Someone had brought the river into the room and then taken it away again, as if keeping a promise to water. A soft rap sounded on the door. It was a knuckle, not a fist. He opened to the corridor. The young man from the third floor, the teacher, ink on his fingers even now, had come down a step too many and was pretending he hadn't. Pardon, Monsieur l'Inspecteur. I heard you. The door. He gestured at it, embarrassed by his curiosity like a boy with his hand in the cupboard. Come in a moment, Maigret said, as if it would save the young man the trouble of inventing an excuse. You didn't tell me your name the other day. That's my fault. Lucien, the young man said. He coloured faintly, as some men do when giving their names, as if it were a confession. Lucien what? Burton. He came as far as the threshold, and then stopped, obedient to a rule he had not been taught. His eyes went to the book on the seamstress's shelf. He could not see from here, but knew existed all the same. People's glances carry memories like that. They go to the place where the thing is, not to the thing. Is there news? There's always a little, Maigret said. Tell me, did you know him well enough to be in here before? Lucien shook his head. We talked in the stairwell. About the weather, about Latin sometimes. He had a good memory for declensions. He told me once he had learned them in the army to keep his mind off other things. And in summer? Maigret asked, not because he expected a summer answer, but because the word had been in the inscription in the book. He watched the slight flicker in the young man's eyes and knew at once he had not wasted the question. I leave in summer, Lucien said too quickly, for the provinces. Lessons for boys who are lazy all year and become industrious when their mothers pay by the hour. You didn't know any Elle from his past? Maigret kept the tone gentle, almost bored. Elle, as in a woman, perhaps. Only Madame Vasseur, but her name is not Elle, and she is not his past. He smiled, but it was the smile one learns for stares where neighbours meet. I'm sorry. It's nothing, Maigret said, which was almost true. He let the young man go. In the corridor, the sewing machine started up, stopped, started again, each time with a little whine that sounded like someone deciding against speaking, and then speaking anyway. He stayed another hour. The light in the room moved hardly at all, simply dulled. Once he went to the kitchen and held his hand above the stove. The pilot was out. It had been out yesterday too. He tried the tap. A cough of brown water, then clear. Everything here worked in the way things work when their owner is precise and the world is not. He went downstairs and sat in the concierge's lodge. She was shelling peas with the grave industry of someone whose hands prefer to be sure of themselves. He told her, with exaggerated indifference, that he would wait in the room for a while in case Demain decided to keep an appointment. She liked that. She liked that he said the word, that he let her see he had seen it, and said in a voice that tried to be casual, he once had a visitor, in May, a woman who walked like a person who wanted to be the same size as the wall. She had a veil that made it worse. She stayed 12 minutes. I looked at the clock because I was boiling eggs. Veils are out of fashion, Maigret said mildly. They are when you want to be seen, she answered, and he admired her for it. At 5, the postman came. He was young, with a face that had not yet decided how to be tired. The concierge called him in, pleased to be a hostess. For Monsieur Collin? Maigret asked. Nothing, the postman said. He looked at his satchel anyway, as if to comfort it. Yesterday also nothing. He usually gets a postcard Tuesday. From where? Mélin. The word dropped into the room like a stone that had been waiting above the pond. A bench is on it, and some trees. Always the same hand, neat. A small bonjour and a day. It arrives with the Tuesday second post. He reads it on the stairs and puts it in his pocket like a man who wants to keep something warm. Who sends it? I don't look at names, the postman said, but his cheeks admitted that he sometimes did. Elle? Maigret asked, and the young man tried not to nod. He failed by a centimetre. After the postman left, Maigret returned upstairs and took the bus ticket from the jacket pocket once more, though he knew what it said. The habit of looking again is not only for new facts, it is for letting the old ones say their piece. The raincoat from the laundry, damp on Friday. The suitcase exchanged by the river and the shoes wet on a dry street. The bolt wiped. The letter corner saying a day that had passed and seemed stubbornly to remain. At 7 he went home to Boulevard Richard Lenoir and ate stew that had been told it was stew by a woman who had been making it long enough to trust it. He told Madame Maigret not much, as he often did, and she did not seem to mind. After the plates were cleared, she said, while wiping the table with a cloth that made small circles, "You know, when people wedge papers in windows, it is either to stop a rattle or to hide a thing from someone who is already in the room. From a husband, from a child, from a visitor who looks too much at tables." He looked up, surprised by the neatness with which she had put a thought he had been circling. "You've done a lot of hiding." "I've a tidy house," she said, and sat down opposite him. Tomorrow is a word people use when they are afraid of today. He slept poor, woke at 5, and was at Rue de Charenton before the concierge had put her kettle on. The building before breakfast has a particular honesty. It hasn't dressed itself yet. He went straight to the room, opened quietly, and took his place in the armchair with his hat on his knees. If Demain was going to call, it would call early. Men who want to be unseen choose the morning before the street wakes. At 6:30, the metal of the stair rail sang faintly. Someone coming up who did not want to be heard. The footfalls were careful, the way a tall man learns to step when he believes in silence. A pause outside the door, the lightest touch to the bolt that was no longer thrown. Then the door turned 2 millimeters in the latch before he stopped it with his palm and opened it fully with his shoulder. The man in the doorway had hair slicked back and a face that arranged itself quickly, as if tidiness were a defense. He wore a light coat that had seen better Saturdays. For half a second he considered running. Then he smiled with professional pleasantness, the kind one uses on people one has never met and hopes never to meet again. "Good morning," he said, too brightly. "I was coming to see a friend," Maigret finished for him, "at 6:30. Is this unusual?" "It is unusual to come with a key." Maigret glanced at the man's right hand. It wasn't there now, but the memory of how he had turned the latch without a sound was still on the air, like perfume. "Do you know where he is?" "Who?" "You know who," Maigret said, not unkindly. "Shut the door." The man obeyed. Up close, he smelled faintly of cheap soap and a better cologne put on to argue with it. On his left cuff, there was a fine brown thread. River mud dries to a colour that is not quite brown, not quite grey. On cloth, it leaves a joke in poor taste. The man put his hands in his pockets and took them out again, sighed as if to say, "All right," then, and tried another smile. "I was asked to come this morning," he said, "to take something." "By whom?" "By the one who asked me to take something on Saturday." He looked around the room, taking inventory the way a scavenger bird does. His eyes found the umbrella stand, found its emptiness, and moved on too quickly. "I was told there would be a sign." Maigret let his gaze go to the window. The letter corner was as it had been, white as a tooth in the putty's crack. "You like signs?" "I like to do what I'm paid to do," the man said. His voice had lost some of its slickness, as if the early hour had sanded it. "And then to go." "What did you take on Saturday?" The man shifted. His chin performed a small theatre. "Papers, letters, old things. You know how people are with old things." "And the umbrella?" "I don't like umbrellas," the man said too quickly. "Neither do I," Maigret said. "They drip." They stood, not far, from each other, with the morning in the room like a third person who had not yet decided which of them to prefer. From below, the concierge's kettle began to whistle. The man flinched at the sound, as if it were a signal he had missed. "You'll tell me your name," Maigret said at last, as if it were a favour to both of them, "and the address of the person who pays you to come and go by the river." The man laughed once and then looked at the floor. "Why would I?" "Because I'll ask you again in an office where the chairs are harder," Maigret said, without malice. "And because it is 6:35 and I haven't had my coffee." Something in the way he said it loosened a small screw inside the man's chest. "Le Marin," he muttered. "Antoine, Rue des Écoles, number 11. And the person?" The man hesitated, and in that hesitation, Maigret saw the shape of the next part of the case, as one sees the stair one hasn't climbed yet from the angle of the first. The name would be a woman's, he thought, from Melun, with handwriting neat and spared, who had sent postcards of benches to a man who kept his bed like a soldier and his window like a habit. The man's mouth opened. "Léonie," he said, "from Melun." "Demain," Maigret said softly, almost to himself, and the room, which had been holding its breath, let a little out. Le Marin said the name as if it were a coin he had decided, at last, to spend. The room seemed to absorb it and make the edges softer. "Léonie from Melun." Maigret repeated. Not a question. He moved past the man to the table, set his hat there, and filled his pipe with the same slow thumb press that made men talk more than questions did. You went to the river because of her. I went because a letter told me to, Lemarine said. It said there'd be a man with a small case, that I'd take what he gave me and bring it to Melon and leave it where I was told. You didn't meet her. I met a window, he said, with a brief, crooked smile. A tobacco shop near the station, under the counter, left side, behind the packets with the sailors on them. I put the bundle there. Sunday morning there was money to take in the same place. Monday, this morning, there was to be more to take. The sign would be here. He looked at the white corner in the putty, the way a dog looks at a door it knows leads to meat. And your address? He looked stung, as if giving it had been a lapse. It's mine. You can find me if you want, he said defensively. I have, Maigret said mildly. Sit down, not in the armchair. He motioned to the kitchen chair. Lemarine obeyed, his hands on his knees. What did you take on Saturday? Letters, tied with string, old. The paper had that crackle. They were wrapped in brown paper with twine, and there was a handkerchief around that. He took the case away empty, I think. I didn't look too much. I prefer not to know. The weight of things. Maigret nodded. And you were told to come back demain. Monday morning, yes, early. Lemarine hesitated. He said the umbrella too. The umbrella? Maigret watched the way the man's eyes slid, as if remembering the stand and finding it empty again. He said the umbrella would be for Monday. I told him I don't like umbrellas. He said I didn't have to like it. Who told you? The man or the letter? The man by the river, Lemarine said, and the flick of his gaze away told Maigret that he wasn't lying now, or not entirely. He said he needed Sunday with it. With an umbrella. I don't ask why a man needs Sunday with anything, Lemarine said, almost philosophical. I only ask where and when. Maigret let the silence return, like a cat to its chair. He heard the concierge moving below, the kettle whistling, the spoon tap-tapping the rim of a cup. You'll come to the office now, he said at last, as if the thought had been his from the beginning, and the rest had been a courtesy to the morning. We'll talk some more there. At the Quai des Orfèvres, the office had warmed itself while he was gone. The radiator ticked discreetly. He put Lemarine in a chair that had seen conversation of all flavours, and let Janvier do the small, necessary tasks that make a room official. Names written, a coat hung on a peg, a pen uncapped. Who is Léonie? Maigret asked, when the page had a heading. A woman in Melun who likes benches in postcards, Lemarine said, attempting levity and failing. You don't know her. I know her writing. Tight, like someone who never throws a food ticket away. He shrugged. She sent the money to the tabac in small notes. Twice. You think she's frightened? Maigret said. I think people who use me are often frightened, Lemarine replied, and something in his tone suggested not boasting, not shame, but a craftsman's tiredness. Maigret stood at the window and watched the river for a minute. It had begun to rain again. Small, hard drops that made stipples on the surface, and then disappeared. He turned back. We'll walk you home later, he said. If we need you, the chair will be waiting. He left Janvier with a few quiet instructions and, while the day was still young enough to allow a journey and a talk before dusk, took the train to Melun. In the carriage, the windows were fogged by the breath of people who had got used to damp. Fields slid by, flat and resigned. A man in a brown coat slept with his mouth open and his hat on his knees. Across the aisle, a woman darned a sock with the fierce concentration of someone who had decided that if one small thing could be mended, perhaps a larger thing could too. Melun met him with the river again, gentler here, wider, as if the city's arguments had been settled and the water had been allowed to remember its childhood. He walked from the station through streets that were narrower than Paris's but cleaner, the kind of streets where white curtains were really white, and the baker's window had a shine of glass no one had had to scold for. He found the tabac without asking. Every town has one that is the town. Behind the counter, a woman with a bun so tight it drew her eyebrows higher looked at him in the way shopkeepers do, evaluating whether he wished to buy or to interrupt. "Do you keep things under your counter for Paris?" he asked, laying a 5-franc piece on the worn wood. Money, even small money, makes questions less impertinent. "We keep tobacco," she said. But her eyes flicked to the left, to the space behind the packets with the sailors. "And sometimes," she added lower, "people keep their little arrangements." "You have a customer named Léonie." She sighed through her nose, a sound like steam escaping a kettle not properly lidded. "All women over 40 here are named Léonie or Madeleine. Be precise." He took the coin back, then put it down again, nearer to her fingers. Neat handwriting, postcards on Tuesdays, a bench with trees. The shopkeeper looked at the coin as if it had begun to grow interesting. "Madame Léonie B.," she said at last, keeping the surname to herself out of habit, not caution. "Lives near the river, behind the church. She sends her cards after Vespers. She buys paper from me, with little roses in the corners, and never uses it." He thanked her and stepped out. The sky was the colour of the inside of a tin. He passed the church. A man in a cassock crossed the square with his head bowed, as if negotiating with the wind. Behind it, a narrow lane led to a row of small houses with shutters that had been painted recently enough. He found the one he wanted because the step was scrubbed and the brass on the bell pull had not been allowed to tarnish. The door opened to reveal a woman of about 55, hair carefully arranged, dress plain, but good. Her hands were the kind that know how to fold things well. She looked at him and saw everything she needed to before he spoke. "Monsieur Maigret," she said, to his mild surprise. "We don't know each other," he said. "No," she admitted. "But I know the way a man holds his hat when he comes with a question he would rather ask inside than on the step." She stood aside. "Please," she added, and in that word was not hospitality, but resignation. The room had a smell of furniture polish and old air made acceptable by flowers, 2 chrysanthemums in a vase, the kind that behave. On the mantel was a photograph of a man in uniform, with the expression of one who knew the photographer and did not trust him. Beside it, a small silver box and a postcard with a bench, carefully placed so that the picture leaned just at the angle that makes a thing look natural. "You send those to Paris," he said, glancing at the bench. She folded her hands. "I send a small bonjour to a man who once taught me to like the sound of the afternoon. And on Saturday," he said, "you arranged for letters to be taken from him and left under a counter." Her eyes did not flinch, but her throat moved. "I arranged to have the past put where it could no longer be taken out by anyone who had not lived it," she said. The phrasing had the carefulness of someone who has spoken to herself all night. "I thought it would be kindest." "Kind to whom?" "To everyone," she said. "To his solitude, to my house, to the boy who is not my son, but thinks he must keep my reputation warm." She lifted her chin a little, and Maigret saw the lines that are made by scorn one does not allow oneself to express. "You visited him in May," he said, 12 minutes, with a veil. The faintest pink came into her cheeks. "I am not a woman for veils," she said, "but sometimes the street makes you into someone other people will not bother." We said little. We decided what to do. He would send the letters. I would send the money to the place that would not look at me. "And the umbrella?" She looked as if this were a question she had hoped would not be asked. Her eyes went to the chrysanthemums and back. He had always been very exact with his things," she said. "The umbrella was a joke between us, from when we were young and it rained, and he would not share because of a superstition he had. He said Monday he would give it to me, that tomorrow I could have it." The last words were very small. "You wanted the umbrella," he said, not unkindly. "I wanted," she said, and stopped. When she spoke again, the voice was steady. He wrote that there was something inside the handle, but not what. He was a man who liked to keep a promise until the minute it was due. A key? Maigret asked. A photograph, she said after a moment. He did not say. He wrote, Demain, la pluie sera à toi. Tomorrow, the rain will be yours. She smiled without showing her teeth. It is a way to tell someone you owe them a shelter. And Sunday? Maigret asked. He wanted Sunday with it. Because he could not part with it on a market day, she said. And now the smile was a little real. You are a policeman and a man. You know both kinds of difficulty. He did. He stood, walked to the mantel, looked at the uniformed man. Your husband? My late husband, she said. 2 years. He was a decent man who liked me to be a decent woman in public and private. I have practiced that. I am good at it. He left a nephew to look after me. The nephew is a clerk in a bank. He reads people's letters if you leave them on a table. So, you wanted the old letters out of Paris and into a place where they could be in a silver box, and no one would open it, he said. Yes. She looked at him directly. If this is a crime, I accept that I have done it. It is not a crime to want an afternoon to remain an afternoon, he said. He returned to his chair. When did you last hear from him? Friday. He wrote that Saturday morning he would give the letters to the man. That Monday he would give the umbrella. He told me not to come to Paris. He wrote, Wait at the bench. If something goes wrong, you will know by the time of the church bell. And at vespers? I did not go, she said quietly. I did not need to. The bell told me nothing, and that was something. Maigret's pipe had remained in his pocket, forgotten. He took it out, turned it between his fingers, and put it back. He is not in his room, he said. There are marks of the river on his floor that do not belong to the rain. A man came to take letters. He came back for an umbrella and found a policeman instead. She closed her eyes, not in relief and not in grief, but in that way people have when a sentence finally sits in the room and stops moving. I did not want him hurt, she said, and the words were not theatrical. They were simply what she had. I wanted him not to be in trouble. He is a man who collects small troubles like wool on a coat. Who else knows? Maigret asked. No one who matters, she said. And then, a moment later, except the boy who is not my son. He saw the postcard once. He said, Who is C? I said, A cousin. He said, Tomorrow I will go to Paris and find him and tell him to stop. He is a tidy boy. He thinks the world is better when things are put away. When did he say, tomorrow? On Friday, she said. He works on Saturdays until noon. He would have had time if he wanted to play at being my husband's ghost. She looked at her folded hands. He is not a bad boy. He thinks order is love. Outside, the river in Malone moved, as if it had decided to forgive the banks for being so particular. Somewhere a bell struck the half hour and made the air quiver. Maigret stood. I will not ask you to come to Paris, he said. If I need you, I will send a card with a tree and a bench. You will answer only if you wish. She nodded. You will find him? She asked, and she did not put a verb with fear in it, only with finding. I will find where he has gone, he said. Sometimes that is the same as finding a person. On the way back to the station, he walked past the bench from the postcards. It was a bench like any other, and yet its slats held a polish that comes only from one pair of hands choosing the same place many times. He sat for a minute. The wood felt indifferent, then, as the rain thought about beginning again, almost companionable. In the train, he wrote 2 lines on a piece of paper torn from his pad. Nephew, Clark, Friday, tomorrow. Umbrella. Message, keepsake, locket. He did not need to write domain. The word had taken up a chair in his head and was watching what he did with the others. As Paris returned, low and grey and unrepentant, he thought of the umbrella stand's dark, dried thread, of Lemarin's clean left cuff with its dirty thread, of a clerk who tidied women by removing their afternoons, and of a man who had asked for Sunday with his rain. At the quay, Dusk sat like a cat on the river. Janvier was waiting with a small fact that did not look like much and would not leave him alone. "The nephew," he said, reading from his notes, "works at a bank on Rue du Pont-Neuf. Saturday, he left early. Told a colleague he had to fetch his aunt from the station." "She did not come," Maigret said. "No," Janvier agreed. "But he did." He looked up. He was seen near Rue de Charenton at 11. "Tomorrow," Maigret said aloud without meaning to, and the river, hearing, did what rivers do, went on. Morning put a thin milkiness over the city, enough to make the stones look tired, but not enough to promise improvement. Maigret took his coffee standing, the way a man does when his mind has already left the kitchen. Madame Maigret said nothing. She buttered him a slice of bread as if it were part of his coat. He nodded at the door. She nodded back, a private ritual both of them respected. At the bank on Rue du Pont-Neuf, the marble was old, and the ink was new. A smell of blotting paper and wool hung in the lobby, where a porter polished brass as if the weather could be rubbed off the handles. Maigret asked for the manager, and was shown into a small office with framed photographs of men in hats shaking hands with other men in hats. The manager was lean and dry, his tie a lesson. "We expect discretion," he said, before there had been any need to expect anything. "Our clerks have lives," Maigret said, unobtrusively taking off his hat and not asking where to put it until the manager had to look around and clear a chair. "I'm looking for a nephew who looks after an aunt and thinks order is a kind of love." The manager's eyelids agreed, though his mouth did not. "You must mean be a serious young man. Too serious, perhaps. He likes figures to add up." "They usually do for him," Maigret said. "On Saturday?" "He left at 11. The manager touched his calendar with a finger, as if the square of the day might bruise. "He said his aunt was arriving and that he had to fetch her. He returned on Monday, a little late, flustered. His trousers were damp at the hem. He apologized twice. I dislike apologies. They only make you think of the thing twice." "No umbrella?" Maigret asked. "He is a man who goes between raindrops," the manager said, with a thin smile meant to be superior. And that missed. The porter was easier. In the corridor, while the manager sharpened a pencil, he said in a low voice, "He had an umbrella on Monday. Old, good wood. He kept it very straight as if it might argue with him. I noticed because he never carries one. He says it makes a man look like a question mark." The address took no effort to have. The porter liked to be helpful, and helpful men keep small books in their heads. Maigret walked there at a pace that matched the day. Not slow, not quick. Hat brim beaded with tiny points of moisture that refused to combine into drops. The building was of those that have decided to be respectable by being ordinary. The concierge was knitting. She looked up and assessed him without moving her hands. "On the 2nd, she said before he asked. "He's a quiet boy. His shirts are folded like paper." The nephew's room was as expected. The bed made with the kind of tightness people mistake for virtue. A desk with pens laid out like soldiers. A single plant on the windowsill that had learned not to grow too quickly. Near the door, in a stand, an umbrella stood, as a visitor who hoped not to be noticed. The handle was horn, worn smooth, with a faint line near the ferrule where someone who didn't know about it might not have looked. The young man himself opened to Maigret's knock wearing the expression of one who has been expecting a knock of some sort all morning, and had prepared 3 versions of his face to answer it. He was pale in the way clerks are pale. His hair clipped short with a precision that was anxious rather than military. He had good shoes. "I'm from the police," Maigret said, and watched the breath that left the young man's chest, as if it had been waiting there all night. "I'm interested in umbrellas. May I come in?" The young man stood aside automatically. "I don't know anything about," he began, and then saw the umbrella in his own stand, and the sentence realized it would have to make a different shape to pass between them. "It's yours?" Maigret asked, almost idle. "It is in my room," the nephew said, which was not an answer, but which often passes for one among tidy people. I found it. Where? In the street, he said, too quickly, then with forced calm. Near the bridge. Someone had left it leaning against the wall. There is a way an umbrella leans when it is left, Maigret said, and a way it leans when it is put. This one looks as if it has always stood. The young man coloured and looked at the plant as if it might assist. I took it to return it, he said, to my aunt. He looked at the desk, at the neat stack of papers there, at a blot that had been cleaned too much. She is sentimental about old things. She is sentimental about one old thing, Maigret said, about the rain belonging to a certain day. The young man swallowed. She should not be, he said, and for the first time there was heat in him. It makes people talk. People in a town talk, monsieur. They talk until the walls repeat them. I only want my aunt to be. He groped for the word and rescued left. Left alone, Maigret finished gently. He went to the umbrella, put his fingers around the horn, feeling the slight give of the collar, where it could be unscrewed. He did not turn it. He lifted it instead, very slightly, and felt the weight in his hand. Old umbrellas, when they have secret purposes, tell it in the wrist. You opened it, he said. The young man hesitated just long enough to confess. I tried. And? It would not, he said. I took it to a man, on Rue des Lombards. He fixes such things. He said the screw was stubborn. He said he could make it obedient for a little money. His eyes flicked to Maigret's face, testing the notion that money could be a neutral fact. He opened it and handed me a piece of paper folded small. I did not read it. I put it back. You didn't read it, Maigret repeated without irony. I did not read it, the young man said again, and this time he almost believed himself. The man looked, though. He said the initial was L. He made a sound, like when soap slips from your hand into the water. Then you put the paper back and took the umbrella home, Maigret said, to keep it safe for your aunt, who must be left alone. He nodded with such gravity one would have thought he had just explained to a magistrate the foundations of his ethics. And on Monday morning? I went to Melun, he said, to the tabac. I took money from under the counter because there was a note saying to take it. I meant to put it in the bank and then send it to my aunt properly. The way things should be done. He looked at Maigret as if he expected a ribbon. The way things should be done, Maigret echoed, and for a moment a flicker of irritation passed over his broad face. Not at the boy exactly, but at the kind of world that teaches boys to think a straight line is always kinder than a curve. Did you see him on Saturday? The young man stared at a place on the floor where there was nothing. I went, he said. I went to tell him to stop. I said it was indecent. I said my aunt had a name and that names are like glass. He asked me in. He was polite and did not sit down because I had not. He said I was young and that he had once been young. I told him I did not care for that. He smiled. It made me angrier because it was not a smile against me. It was a smile for something else in his head. He stopped and swallowed, the movement like a small engine under his collar. I did not touch him. Did you take the umbrella then? No, he said, and he was telling the truth. He had it near the door. He put his hand on it as if a habit. He said Monday he would give it to. He looked at the plant again, as if it might have grown the rest of the sentence in the night. He did not say. He said Monday, Maigret repeated softly, and the word reached back into the empty room on Rue de Charenton and settled there again. The repairer on Rue des Lombards had a shop so narrow that two men standing in it made a crowd. Umbrella ribs hung from hooks like the bones of small birds. The man himself had the resigned hands of someone who has been asked to make cheap things live too long. He remembered the young clerk. He remembered the horn handle. He remembered the way the screw gave with a noise that was not mechanical so much as personal. I told him not to read. the repairer said, without being asked. He said he did not want to. I said people always want to. He paid me and left like a decent boy who had done something indecent and was willing to behave properly until it forgot him. What was inside? Maigret asked. The question was too direct for his usual style, but the shop was a place where directness seemed appropriate. Everything here was the shape it pretended to be. A paper, the man said, folded, as if it had been folded many times and then unfolded each spring. I saw L, yes, and a date, 1920, I think. I am not a reader of other men's afternoons. And the screw. Old. It had been opened before, you can tell. Metals learn hands. This one knew a particular thumb and did not like a new one. Maigret left him with a coin and a nod that made both of them feel they had kept something intact. In the street, the rain had decided to be steadier. He stopped under a cornice and, because the morning insisted, lit his pipe and watched the match gutter in the draught, and then catch. A woman hurried past with a bundle under her coat in the shape of a loaf. A boy dragged a stick along a railing and made an instrument of it. At the Quai des Orfèvres, he telephoned the Tabac in Melun. The bun had softened in the shopkeeper's hair. Yes, she said, voice a little annoyed, a little satisfied. Someone took the money on Monday, early. Not the man from Paris, a younger one with hands like paper. He knew the phrase. He said it softly. I gave him the coins because coins do not lie. Did he leave something? Maigret asked. A note with nothing on it, she said. It felt like a note anyway, the kind of leaving that makes a person think, well, that is that. I do not like such notes. They make dust in my throat. He hung up and stood at the window a while, pipe in the corner of his mouth, the stem resting in that familiar groove his teeth had made over years. The river looked as if it had made its mind up to leave Paris, which of course it had long ago. On his desk, the pad with his 4 lines waited. He added 2 more. Umbrella opened Sunday by repairer, paper with L, 1920. Money taken Monday by nephew. He sat back, and in the quiet of the room the case arranged itself not as a sequence of crimes, but as a series of small courtesies and impolitenesses. A man who had kept afternoons alive in a drawer. A woman who had tried to put them where they would not be poured. A boy who believed that cleanliness is a virtue even for other people's hearts. A city that passes messages under counters because it does not want to say them aloud. And where was Colin? The question did not sharpen itself with suspicion. It sat with a low ache. He saw again the dried thread of river on the floorboards by the stand, the shoes wet on a dry street, the bolt wiped not as if to hide fingerprints, but as if to make a thing presentable. He thought of Sunday, of a man in a room with an umbrella and a promise due Monday. People disappear sometimes, not because someone makes them, but because they are busy arranging themselves to be gone. He went back, late in the afternoon, to Rue de Charenton, not to search, not to ask, just to be in the air where the decisions had been. The concierge looked up with a mixture of agreeableness and reproach, as if he were a doctor who came without his bag. On the stairs, the seamstress had fallen asleep in her chair, head back, mouth a little open, the machine patient beside her. In the room, the light had the flat, patient quality of 4 o'clock in a wet week. He sat in the armchair again, and after a moment, leaned forward and laid his palm on the seat cushion where the deeper dent was. It had kept its shape, as if the man might come back and fit into it without even noticing he had left. On the windowsill, the ashtray with its chip had gathered a film of dust that was too recent to be respectable. He moved it a finger's width and moved it back. The triangle of paper with demain hid its face, obedient to the putty. He thought of pulling it free, of reading the back, of seeing whether there was an initial. He did not. He had already been told the initial. He stayed until the light lost interest and then rose, put on his coat, and took the umbrella from the nephew's stand with him. Not to confiscate it, not to keep it from anyone, but because sometimes one must carry an object to see to whom it belongs. On the landing, he met the young Latin teacher coming down. The boy looked at the umbrella and then at Maigret's face and smiled, as if something in him had decided it was safe to move from one tense to another. "Going out in the rain, monsieur?" he said. "It may stop," Maigret said, and did not sound as if he believed it. He paused on the step. "Tell me, what is the Latin for tomorrow?" "Crasse," the boy said, pleased to be asked. "From crasse. Crasse, the sound of the crow." Maigret nodded. "In French, it is softer," he said, "but it makes the same promise." He went down to the street with the umbrella under his arm, the way a man carries a memory he has agreed not to open on the public pavement. And the rain, seeing him, took on that kindly, even insistence that can be mistaken for company. He kept the umbrella beside his desk through the morning, as if it were another visitor, one who understood waiting. Work moved around it. Janvier brought notes about the bank clerk's hours. A report from the river brigade lay cornerwise, thin as a reassurance. Nothing found, nothing to frighten the newspapers. Now and then, Maigret's hand went to the horn, handle without quite closing on it, the way a man touches a letter in his pocket before he has decided whether to read it. At last, he drew the blinds a finger lower against the grey and set the umbrella across his knees. The screw at the ferrule was the sort that learns a thumb and prefers it. He felt for the give with the patience one uses on a reluctant friend. It came with a small private sound, and the cap lifted. Inside, rolled carefully, was the paper the repairer had seen. It carried the dry smoothness of things that have been folded and unfolded over many years. He did not unroll it all at once. He let the roll loosen under its own memory. There was indeed an initial on the first crease, a fine, old-fashioned L made by a hand that had once practiced flourishes and then grown too sober for them. The date lay nearby, precise, June 14th, 1920. No names. One line in a smaller hand beneath, less sure of itself, "Sous la pluie au Pont Marie." He held it in his palm a moment, then slipped it home exactly as it had lain, and turned the screw back until the metal became itself again. He did not need to read more than that. People who write such lines do not intend them for court or for files. They are for a drawer that opens softly on afternoons. He stood at the window until the river and the weather were one colour, and then told Janvier to fetch the nephew. The boy came like a man summoned to a dental chair, polite, ironed, determined to be the kind of patient who makes the doctor respect him. He sat straight on the edge of the chair and took his hat off as if that might help. He did not look at the umbrella. "You went into the room on Sunday," Maigret said, as if they had already established it and were merely adjusting the detail. "Not with a key. The bolt was thrown. You used something thin to lift it." The boy's eyes widened and then narrowed. Truth flickered like a match cupped against a draught. "I asked a locksmith to show me," he said after a pause, the confession wearing its best suit. "Not to steal, to prevent a scandal." "You wiped the bolt," Maigret continued, without heat. "It was a kind idea in its way." "I didn't want Madame Vasseur to say I had dirtied anything," he said, and the earnestness of it would have been laughable if it had not been so carefully genuine. "I took only the umbrella." "You saw the sugar on the saucer, the bed made, the letter at the window." He looked down at his hands. "I saw his habits," he said softly. "I did not want my aunt to have to see them written on by the street." "And on Monday," Maigret went on in the same mild tone, "you went to Melun and collected money that was not yours in order to return it to the world in the proper way." "I would have," he said quickly, almost relieved to speak of money. "I would have made it proper. There was a note under the counter that said to take it, so I took it. You see, I did not rob, I obeyed, and I would have put it in my name for a day and then—" "You could have left it where it was," Maigret said. "People's arrangements, even untidy ones, sometimes hold them up." He watched the boy's face try to keep its balance and fail. "Why did you go to him on Saturday?" "I told you, the boy said, to tell him to stop, to say that my aunt has a name. And he smiled, Maigret said. Not at you. The boy nodded without looking up. His mouth tightened. There is a kind of anger that does not raise a voice. It presses the lips together until they find another shape. He spoke as if time were not a slope, the boy said. As if a day now were the same as a day then. It isn't. People look, they count. They say things to each other in bakeries. And did you see him after that? No. Did you see his hat by the river? The boy looked up quickly. No, he said, and that was true. He half rose, as if finished, and then sat when Maigret did not move. There was paper in the umbrella, Maigret said. You know. I did not read it, he said at once, too quickly, and then slower, a decent boy telling a half-decent truth. I read the first line. There was an L. There was a date. It was before my mother was married. It made me feel as if my shoes were on the wrong feet. You took it back to the umbrella, Maigret said. That is to your credit. The boy's throat moved. I do not want to be cruel, he said suddenly, the words spilling as if he had rehearsed them, and now they were impatient. I wanted to put things away, so that my aunt could say to the neighbours what one says. No, there was nothing. He was a friend of my husband's, perhaps. I thought if the umbrella were in my hallway, and the money in my bank, and the letters under a counter had been turned into numbers, then the world would return to its day. And the man? Maigret asked. How does he return to his day? The boy's face altered, the tidy lines going a little slack. He had not rehearsed that part. He made a helpless movement with his hand and dropped it. I'm not bad, he said, and he meant it. I am not trying to hurt. I know, Maigret said. He stood, and the boy stood, grateful for direction. You'll go back to your desk. You will not go to Milan again unless I say. You will not explain things to your aunt. If she wishes to keep a bench in her mind, that is her business. The boy left with his hat in both hands, smaller than when he had come, not because he had been broken, but because one of his rules had been taken from him, and he felt the wind where the rule had been. When the door had closed, Maigret looked once more at the umbrella, as if it might suggest what to do with itself. Some objects carry their own addresses. He took it up, and, without telling anyone where he was going, walked out into the noon of a day that had forgotten how to be noon. The rain had settled into a patient energy, not forceful, just insisting. He went by foot as far as the Gare de Lyon, because walking with another man's umbrella under your arm feels less like theft if you have tired yourself a little. On the platform, the breath of the engines made a warmer fog than the air outside. People moved, with bundles held close to their ribs. He did not go straight to the Tabac in Melun. First, he stood at the edge of the square and watched the way the town moved. A woman pulled a child along by his hand. The child dragged his heels not out of stubbornness, but to make a sound with them. A policeman adjusted his cape as if it were a badge. The river here was generous. He crossed to the church because the door was open and the air inside was the kind that rests on your shoulders instead of your head. Behind the church, the lane to Léonie's house was empty. He did not ring right away. He stood looking at the washed brass of the bell pull and the pattern the rain made in the dust on the step. When he did pull, the sound travelled in and came back to him slightly warmer. She opened with her hair arranged precisely as before, but her eyes were not the same. They had done some work in his absence. She looked at the umbrella and not at him, as if the umbrella were the man to be spoken to and he, the bearer. I should have come yesterday, she said without greeting. There are things that arrive better the second day, he answered, and crossed the threshold at her small movement. The chrysanthemums were still behaving. The silver box had been polished, badly, as if by a hand that had lost patience with the circular motion and wanted it to be over. He set the umbrella on the table between the flowers and the photograph on the mantel and did not touch the screw. She did not touch it either. They both looked at it as people look at a coffin when no one has yet said they may weep. "You knew the paper was inside," he said after a moment. "He told me," she said. She spoke not into his face, but toward the umbrella. Not what it said, only that it would be the right thing to give me after all. That after all, I should have one thing that belonged to that weather. "You could have had more than one," he said gently. She shook her head. "I could have had all of it and not kept it. I'm not made for that. I'm made for dusting." She glanced at the box. "I had thought—" She released the thought. "It doesn't matter. Does he live?" "We do not know," Maigret said, and he kept his voice at a level that did not tip the room. We have not found anything that insists on being an answer." She closed her eyes, the way a person does when someone puts a hand lightly on the back of their neck. He is a man who would dislike being an answer. She put her fingers on the umbrella not to open it, but to feel the wood. He liked to stand in a doorway and not go in. He liked to promise and then keep it exactly. "He asked for Sunday," Maigret said. "Because he could not say goodbye on a market day," she repeated, the ghost of the smile returning. "He once stood in the rain for an hour because he had said, 'at the hour,' and arrived 10 minutes early and would not steal 10 minutes from a promise. You see how it is." He did. The quiet accuracy of it made his chest feel too large. He nodded toward the umbrella. "Will you open it?" She made no movement at first. Then she took a breath that made a small square at her throat and put her hands on the handle as if it were the handle of a drawer she had opened in the same way every day of her life. She turned the screw. It yielded calmly. She drew the paper out and, without unrolling it yet, held it to her face for the faint smell old paper keeps, like a memory of flour. Then she unrolled it slowly. He did not read over her shoulder. He watched her face. She did not cry. A person can read without their eyes filling if the reading is of something they already know. After a time, she placed the paper very carefully on the table, not under the chrysanthemums and not under the box, but beside the umbrella, as if those three things together made the table correct. "He wrote well," she said simply. "Enough," Maigret agreed. "He never wrote not to be read," she said. "Even now." She put the paper into the silver box, then took it out again. "Not yet." He told her, in a few sentences that did not bruise the air, about the nephew, about the locksmith, about the money and the tabac. She listened without comment until the end, and then she nodded once, slowly. "He is a good boy," she said, and it was not a rebuke. "He is the opposite of a man who waits in rain. He cannot bear a minute to be larger than itself. It frightens him." "With time," Maigret said, "he may learn where to stand when it rains." She looked at the bench postcard on the mantel, and then at the real rain beyond the window, and then at him. "If you find him," she said, neither hope nor despair in the words, only a kind of correctness, "you will tell me badly. Not well. Badly, like someone who has not practiced bad news." "I will sit," he said. "There will be coffee." He stood then, because there was nothing left to say that would not be repetition. At the door he paused. "Did he ever open his window for you?" It was a foolish question, and he knew it, but it had been in his mouth since Rue de Charenton. She seemed to understand that he had carried it not as a policeman, but as a man. "Only once," she said. "At night. He opened it so the rain would have a reason to come in. He took the umbrella back to Paris, not because it belonged to him, but because between one place and another, a thing sometimes speaks, if you let it. In the carriage, he kept it upright and thought about the dried thread by the stand, about a man who did not like to steal minutes from promises, about a word wedged in a window that had not been opened. The river kept pace with the train a while, then fell behind, then returned beside it as if to remind him that water does not choose streets, but streets choose water. At the quay, he found Lognan in the corridor. wearing his gloom like a coat he had inherited, and that did not fit across the shoulders. "You choose days to go to the country," Lognon said sourly. "We had a call from a bargeman near the Ile Saint-Louis. He found a hat in an eddy yesterday and did nothing because it was only a hat. This morning the same eddy had a coat. Now he thinks perhaps the hat belonged to a head." "What sort of coat?" Maigret asked. "Old but brushed," Lognon said. "A ticket stub in the pocket for Mélin. 2 weeks." He delivered it as if forced to hand over his own supper. Maigret took the news the way one takes up a heavy bag one has been expecting. He looked at the umbrella. He looked at the river through the window, dull and sure of itself. He did not hurry. He did not send men running along the quay. He stood a time with the umbrella under his hand and felt the case shift, very slightly, from being a puzzle to being a whether one ought to walk in without a hat. "Go and talk to the bargeman," he told Janvier quietly. "Tell him it is only a coat, and that he has done the right thing." He returned to his chair and sat until the pipe in his hand felt warm without smoke. Tomorrow, he thought, and did not mean the calendar. The word had sat long enough. It wanted to be still. Janvier came back with the bargeman's story, folded small, like a note someone leaves and hopes won't be noticed. He stood in the doorway, rain on his shoulders, his notebook already shut. "He says the hat was on Sunday," Janvier reported. "Late afternoon, by the Ile Saint-Louis. He fished it from the eddy with a boat hook because it kept circling under his keel. He left it on the wall to dry. This morning, same place, a coat turning in the same slow ring. He brought the coat in. Ticket stub in the pocket, Mélin 2 weeks ago, no wallet, cloth smells of river and mothballs, a button mended with navy thread." Maigret nodded once. "Where is it?" "Downstairs. Damp but decent. The rivermen thought it wouldn't be decent to put it on a table. They spread it on a bench in the corridor where the floor was stone, and the air didn't mind damp. It was a careful man's coat, brushed, the nap set in one direction, seams pressed. The navy thread on the second button drew the eye once you knew to look. The lining had been darned at the armpit by a hand that believed a small hole could be put back into the world. He took it under his arm back to Rue de Charenton, not for proof. Proof in such things is often only a way of making a widow of an idea, but because a building recognizes its own. The concierge opened her lodge before he reached it, as if the coat had knocked. "That's his," she said quietly for once. Her hands stopped working without being told to. "The thread is mine. I told him come back next week, and I'd do it with black. And he said, 'It will do with blue. I don't have a week.'" She touched the hem, and then drew the hand back, like someone who fears the temperature of water in a pan. On the first floor, the seamstress came to her door, with the machine still muttering behind her. She glanced once and nodded. "That shoulder is mine," she said, with a pride that did not suit the moment and yet belonged to it. "May I?" She lifted the edge of the collar and showed a tiny stitch that was not factory. He said it pulled when he reached for the umbrella. Madame Vasseur appeared halfway up the stairs as if drawn by the sound of cloth. Her mouth made a small "oh," but no sound came. "Well," she said at last, with the slight defiance of someone who refuses to faint. "That's that then." "It's not that," Maigret said, and surprised himself. "Not yet." He carried the coat up to the room and laid it across the bed that had been made with the soldier's logic. It lay there as if it had always lain there, as if furniture remembers a weight more quickly than people do. He sat in the chair and looked at the window that was still closed. The triangle of paper with demain had not moved. In the ashtray on the sill, the blackened match end now looked less like a match and more like a small stick that had thought about being a bridge and then thought better of it. He stayed until the smell of river in the cloth thinned into the room's own smell. Then he left the coat where it was and went back to the quay, where the river outside the window looked exactly like the river in the cloth. Indifferent, sure of its direction. He sent Janvier to ask the fisherman again about Sunday evening. Not because he expected a new memory, but because sometimes when a man tells the same story twice, the bit he had spared himself the first time presents itself naturally. The fisherman remembered very little else, and remembered it with the modesty of men who distrust their eyes. "He stood on the step," he said. "Not the top one, the second. He did not move for a while. He looked as if he had taken his coat off to keep it dry for someone else. Then a barge passed and the wash annoyed his ankles. He smiled at it. Not like a fool," he added defensively. "Like someone remembering something silly that was once serious. That's all." "Did he go into the water?" Janvier asked, gentle. "I looked away," the man said. "It is not good to watch a man making up his mind. When I looked back, the step was a step." At 5, the day failed to decide whether it was evening. Maigret went home to Boulevard Richard-Lenoir and ate what was put in front of him without noticing its name. Madame Maigret waited until the plate was pushed aside and his pipe lay unlit. "It happens," she said, not to contradict or to console, but to put a thing in its drawer. "Men who keep everything tidy forget that water doesn't. The river likes the second step." He looked at her, and for a moment the office emptied off his face. "You and your phrases," he said. "Sometimes I think you've been sneaking into my cases to get your lines right." "I have been here long enough to know the ones you bring home," she said. "This one has the shape of a man who wanted to arrive on Monday with his umbrella and could not bear arriving with nothing." He slept, because men sleep even when the river is thinking. In the morning, the bargeman's coat had become a ledger entry. The river brigade sent word that they had found nothing else, which is a kind of finding. He went again to the nephew, not to accuse him, merely to move some air around him. The boy received him with a steadiness that had practiced all night and was beginning to fray. The umbrella stood where it had. The plant on the sill had not risked any growth. He had a handkerchief in his hand, though there was nothing to wipe. "I am not charging you with anything," Maigret said first, and the boy's shoulders dropped a half socket. "You did not push him. You did not take his money. You took away a Sunday that was not yours to take. That is not a crime we can write up." The boy nodded miserably. "I thought," he said, and the word broke in the middle. "I thought if he had nothing to give, he would not make a scene somewhere. I imagined him. I imagined someone finding them. The letters, at my aunt's. I thought I could prevent a story." "You prevented a Monday," Maigret said, not unkindly. The boy sat down with sudden awkwardness, as if his knees had forgotten their place. He put his fist to his mouth and took it away and put it back again, a rhythm that was not weeping and yet had learned from it. "I only wanted," he began, and then gave up finding the right story. "If there is a body," he said, in a voice that had shrunk, "will you tell my aunt?" "I will," Maigret said. "Badly." The boy nodded in gratitude for that, which is the kind of gratitude people give when one chooses the blunt instrument instead of the polished one. When Maigret left, the umbrella in the stand looked heavier than it had the day before, as if objects gain weight in rooms where people begin to understand themselves. He walked to the Pont Marie because the fisherman had given him a step to stand on. The rain had decided to be fine and mean. On the parapet, a chalk mark had been left by a child and half dissolved. Chalk and water negotiate quickly. He went down the stairs and stood where a man had stood. The stones were slick. The river made its old argument below. He did not try to see anything that was not there. He took out his pipe and did not light it. Above, a gull made the sound of a hinge that has forgotten oil. When he came back up, Lognon was waiting near the parapet, his gloom somewhat improved by the weather matching it. "No body," he said. "But a shoemaker in the Marais says a man brought him a pair on Saturday evening to be dried quick. Good leather, old polish. He stuffed them with newspaper and put them by the stove. The man waited and read the paper standing up. Paid in exact coins, left without the change he was offered. Hat in his hand like a question mark." "Which paper?" Maigret asked. Lognon looked down at his notes. The evening edition. He folded it at the deaths and marriages. He didn't read either. He looked at the blank space between them. It was the kind of detail that didn't help and stayed. He walked back along the quay with the umbrella under his arm, and the river kept pace politely, and the city went about the work of getting through another day without deciding what it thought of it. In the afternoon, the seamstress came to the quay with a parcel wrapped in brown paper and tied with string too tight, the way cautious hands tie. She stood just inside the door and looked as if the room might make her smaller. "This came on Friday," she said. "I forgot to say, he asked me to take a parcel for him for a day, for Monday. He said a man would ask for it. I said I am not the post. He said it would be a kindness to him and to a lady. He said if she never opened it, that would be all right." She put the parcel on the desk, and the room rearranged itself a little to fit it. "I thought, since Monday has passed, perhaps it is yours to decide." "Thank you," Maigret said. He didn't open it. The paper had taken the shape of its contents too well. It would have been like undressing someone who had chosen their clothes for privacy. He laid his palm on it. A rectangular give, light. Letters, surely, that had not gone by suitcase, but by seamstress. He looked at Janvier and saw him not ask. He put the parcel in a drawer and closed it without the lock. Locks are for secrets one intends to keep. As dusk approached again, the river brigade telephoned to say that a scarf had come up against a ladder downstream and unhooked itself when someone reached for it. It was of the colour shops call sober, neither black nor grey nor navy, a colour that apologises for existing. He thanked them for telling him and returned to his pad, where his list now looked like a thin poem. Window not opened. Umbrella missing, returned with paper. Suitcase Saturday, letters by river. Shoes wet, coat and hat in eddy. Nephew Sunday, bolt wiped, umbrella taken. Seamstress parcel, Monday due. He sat with these lines until the office had the quiet that comes just before the cleaner closes a door in such a way that it sounds like a small mercy. He left the umbrella on the chair and walked back to Rue de Charenton in the evening damp. The concierge had her radio low. A man spoke about the weather as if it were a news item. On the second floor, the air held the same tired sweetness. He opened the door and went in as one goes into a church when no one is there to watch a gesture. He did not sit this time. He stood before the window, very close, felt the faint chill it kept even when all else in the room was stale. He touched the wood without pushing. His finger found the line where paint had taken a brush badly years ago. He looked at the triangle of paper with the old promise. He left it in its crack. The window stayed as it had been since Saturday morning. On the way out, he met Lucien, the young teacher, coming up with a loaf under his arm and ink on his thumb. "You will tell us," the boy said, "if there is something to tell." "I always tell badly," Maigret said. "But I tell." The boy looked relieved, which made no sense and made perfect sense. Night gathered without bothering to finish. He went home and ate soup and said very little and smoked at the open mouth of the stove because the pipe liked to see fire even when it didn't want to be involved. Before he slept, he wrote on a card, neat for once, "Melun, tomorrow, after Vespers." He did not put a name on it. He would know the door. In the morning, the river would either give up a man or not. The truth would either be a body or the shape of absence that must be carried like an umbrella under the arm. He turned out the light and lay in the dark with the feeling, not unpleasant, that the case had ceased to be a puzzle and become a kind of weather, and that his work was to be in it without pretending to decide it. The word in the window had done its work. Tomorrow was, as always, already here. The bell at Saint-Aspect rang the way old bells do, a fraction early, an apology late. He arrived in Melun just after the last echo had folded itself into the damp air. The tabac was open. The shopkeeper's bun had survived another afternoon. She looked at him as if she had been keeping a space in her day. "You sent a card," she said. "No name." That is either the police or a suitor. You are not a suitor. I am here to be clumsy, Maigret said. He put the umbrella on the counter for a moment, just the weight of it, the way a patient puts his hat there before going in to the doctor. He asked for 2 packets of papers he did not need, and walked out with only one. The other he left behind under the counter, left side, behind the sailors, where private arrangements lived. The street to Léonie's house was rinsed. He stood a second on the step, as yesterday, a man who knows what he has to say and is trying to do it in the worst possible way, because some things deserve the inadequacy. When she opened, she took in the umbrella, the coat he did not carry, the fact of him. She moved aside without the formality of words. In the sitting room, the chrysanthemums had begun to behave less well. One petal was losing heart. He set the umbrella near the table. He did not sit until she did. He did not put his hat anywhere that suggested ownership. They found a coat, he said, and that was all. It was, as promised, badly put. She made a small, ordinary gesture with her fingers at her collarbone, like someone adjusting a seam. Where? An eddy, near the Ile Saint-Louis. A hat yesterday. Shoes were dried by a shoemaker Saturday evening. He watched, paid exact coins, refused change. Shoes have a way of making the last decisions for us, she said, and the sentence wobbled on the edge of too much meaning and then settled. And his room? As he left it, Maigret said. A sugar turned to stone. The window as it was. The word in the putty. She nodded. Not in agreement exactly, but as one nods at a clock that says what one feared it would. He waited. She stood and went to the stove, lit the gas with a match that hesitated before obeying, set water to heat without quite seeing the kettle. When she returned to the table, she saw the umbrella and put a hand on it lightly, as if taking its temperature. I was angry with him for asking for Sunday, she said. I am ashamed to admit it now. It was my pride. One tells oneself one has become sensible. One finds one has only become stubborn. She looked at him and smiled without showing teeth. You have brought more than the umbrella. He took the parcel from his coat pocket and laid it down. Brown paper, string too tight. The shape of letters inside it was obvious now that it had come to the table it had been meant for. He did not push it toward her. The seamstress, he said. He asked for Monday. A man would ask for it. Perhaps the man was me from the beginning. Perhaps it was someone else until he changed his mind. She did not open it. She placed her palm on it briefly, then took her hand away as if heat had met it. It can wait, she said. It has already waited longer than we have. Coffee came, black as a decision one avoids naming. She poured and did not spill. When she handed him his cup, their fingers did not touch. They sat with the cups between their hands like people sitting with a third person who will say nothing useful. In 1920, she said, looking not at him but at the bit of air where the steam drifted. We met at the Pont Marie in a rainstorm that made us walk as if we were already old. He said it felt like being in a room with the city listening at the door. He did not take my arm. He wanted to, and that was enough for him. We were 2 people who did not take what was not promised, and sometimes we did not even take what was. The line in the umbrella, Maigret said. The date. The bridge. He had a way of keeping one thing perfect so he could forgive all the other things that were not, she said. We wrote Tuesdays. We made a chapel out of a day of the week. They drank. The coffee did what coffee does. It steadied nothing and made nothing worse. She went to the mantel and straightened the postcard, of the bench by a degree. If he went into the water, she said, it was not to make a point. It was because he had made all the small points he knew how to make and found he had no larger ones left. It is a way some men have of keeping their promises to themselves. I cannot write that, Maigret said. I know, she answered. I am not asking for it to be written. I am asking for the boy to be allowed to keep his error. He will hug it like a hot brick until it cools, and then he will place it carefully somewhere he can dust it. He went to the Tabac Monday, Maigret said. He knew the phrase. He took the money to make it proper. Of course he did, she said. He will be a good husband to a woman who likes her saucepans hung in order. He will not be a man who opens a window so the rain may have a reason to come in. That is not a crime. She looked down at the umbrella. I will not open this again today. He finished his cup and let the last sip sit a moment on his tongue so that he would not have to find words too quickly. If there is a body, he said. You will sit, she said. There will be coffee. She straightened a spoon that did not need straightening, then laughed once, surprised by the sound in her own room. You see, even now, we tidy. He took his leave with an old-fashioned inclination of the head that did not suit him and suited the day exactly. On the square, he stood until the bell at Saint-Aspect struck the half-hour with the faint impatience of bells in damp weather. He went into the tabac and asked the woman with the bun to send, twice, in 2 weeks, a single sheet of paper in an envelope to the Quai des Orfèvres, no return, no questions. She agreed after adjusting a packet of sailors left 2 millimeters out of their station. On the evening train back, a soldier slept in his seat with his mouth open, one hand on his kit the way a man holds a promise he doesn't trust. The umbrella stood upright, its ferrule on the floor, its handle veined like bone. The carriage was warm enough to make a man think of soup. He did not sleep. He let the rhythm of the train lay a kind of order over a set of facts that refused to be squared. At the quay, the river made the window cold. Janvier had left his notes aligned at an angle he knew Maigret liked, a courtesy that suggested he had been thinking of the man instead of the paper. Nothing from the brigade, nothing from the bargeman, nothing that insisted. He called the nephew and waited with the receiver against his ear until the boy's careful voice arrived, like a piece of paper slid under a door. Go to your aunt, he said. Do not explain. Take her bread and stand at the sink while she slices it. Say you have been cold if you need to say a sentence. Do not tidy. If she gives you an umbrella to carry home, carry it and put it in a corner and do not touch the screw. The boy breathed once, the long, involuntary breath of someone stepping down from a plank he had convinced himself was a bridge. Yes, monsieur, he said. And the courtesy of it was not an avoidance, but a way to be steady. He put the receiver down, and, because there was nothing to be done that would not be a repetition, he put on his coat and walked to the Pont Marie. The rain had thinned to lace. The shoemaker's shop had its door ajar to let the smell of leather mix with the river. A woman leaned on the parapet, not looking at the water, looking at the way other people's eyes went to it. At the second step, he stood as the fisherman had said the man stood, not to inhabit him, but because stairs insist on use once you know their history. There he felt what the other had perhaps felt, that the city, when you are just below it, breathes differently. The surface of the water is more honest at eye level. It does not pretend to be anything but moving. He imagined a man taking off his hat, not to throw it away, but to keep it dry in case he changed his mind. He imagined the annoyance of ankle wash and a private smile at it. Then he climbed back up because men climb. Longyon found him there and managed to produce a remark that sounded almost like human concern, disguised as bitterness. If you ask long enough, the river thinks you want charity, he said. It gives you a glove, a scarf, and then an advertisement board. It has manners, Maigret said. That's the worst of it, Longyon sighed. It thinks it is Paris. They walked back along the quay together, 2 men under one weather, not talking, not needing to. At the office, the parcel lay quiet in the drawer, the umbrella on the chair, the ash in the tray, a grey map that refused to become any country one could point to. He left later than usual and went home on foot because he wanted the day to have used him up. Boulevard Richard Lenoir was wet enough to shine. In his kitchen, the soup had kept a skin for him and did not resent it. He told Madame Maigret approximately as much as before, only with different silences in the spaces between the words. She listened with the old economy that made his telling better, simply by not making it worse. "At vespers," she said, drying a plate with a cloth she approved of. "One prays for the day that is finishing, not for the one to come. It is a good time to deliver news. The saints are still available." He smiled with his mouth and not with his face. "You have a phrase for all hours." "I had to learn them while waiting for you," she said, and the sentence sat between them, with the comfortable weight of a large cat. He went to bed with the feeling of a man who has put away the dishes and left a single cup on the table for someone who will come later. Before sleep he saw, not the eddy or the coat, but the small dried thread by the umbrella stand in a precise room, and the little word in the putty that had said what it had to say, and was now only paper again. In the morning, there might be a call, or there might not. He would go to the Rue de Charenton and sit in a chair that kept its dent, or he would not. The work would be the same either way. To be present until someone else's silence decided to speak. He did not plan. He let the dark take the list of thin lines and make of them what darkness makes, a single, soft, continuous thing that cannot be argued with and does not ask to be. He went early to the quay, before the clerks had warmed the ink, and stood a while with his hands in his pockets, looking out at the colour the river had chosen for itself. There was no message from the brigade, no insistence, only the city beginning its day with the stubbornness of a kettle that will not quite boil. On his desk, the parcel from the seamstress lay where he had left it, the string admitting it had been tied by fingers that liked certainty. He did not untie it. He wrote a note instead. 3 lines, not official, folded it, and slid it under the string. Then he put on his coat and took the parcel under his arm the way a man carries a loaf he has not yet decided to eat. Rue de Charenton was rinsed. The concierge had the radio on low. A voice was saying there would be showers as if it were telling the time. She saw the parcel and nodded once, as if he were taking a child to school. "There's been no one," she said. "The post brought nothing. The sewing machine broke a needle. That's all of it." He went up and let himself into the room. He did not stand very long, just enough to look at the bed with the careful coat laid across it, at the umbrella stand where the dark thread no longer said anything new, at the window that kept its word. The triangle of paper in the putty had curled very slightly at the edge, like a person's lip thinking of smiling and changing its mind. Back on the landing, Lucien came up with his daily loaf and the ink on his thumb that had made a habit of itself. "Monsieur," the boy said, with the sincerity tidy people save for funerals and examinations, "will there be—" He didn't finish. A teacher knows when to leave a blank for a student to try. "There will be what there is," Maigret said gently, "which is sometimes enough." He touched the bread with 2 fingers, a benediction clumsy and not unwelcome. "Keep your lessons. Some of us need declensions to hold our days together." At the tabac in Melun, the bun had softened only a fraction. The shopkeeper's eyes did the rest of the expressions. He bought a packet he would not use and left the parcel where private arrangements lived, under the counter, left side, behind the sailors. "For Madame Léonie," he said. "She'll know. If she asks who left it, tell her it was the weather." He took the lane behind the church again, though he had not written a card this time. She opened before he could pull the bell. Perhaps some houses learn a knock in advance. He did not offer the umbrella. He had left it where it belonged yesterday, but he took the parcel from his coat and put it on the table between the flowers and the silver box. "It was due Monday," he said. "Then it is on time," she answered, with that precision people like her have for sentences that mustn't wobble. She put a hand to the string and did not pull it. "I will open it when the room has been quiet a little." "There may never be a body," he said. He did not mean to say it, but he had promised he would be clumsy, and he kept promises. "He would prefer it," she said. He never liked being where people gathered. He thought crowds made him incorrect. She rested her fingers on the parcel. "If you need a sentence for your paper, Write that a gentleman went out too early and the day forgot him. It will not be a lie, and it will not be true enough to make anyone angry. I'll write less than that, he said. She poured coffee again, the second day's version, darker and nearer to medicine. The boy came last night, she said. He stood at the sink while I cut bread. He said he had been cold. He did not explain anything. I am proud of him for that. Leave him his brick, Maigret said. He'll keep it until the heat has gone out of it. She smiled at the word she had given him yesterday, and he had returned to her as a courtesy. You will not come again, she said, and it was not reproach, it was arithmetic. Only if the river forgets itself, he said, and rose. He touched the brim of his hat in a way that felt ridiculous to his hand, and correct to the room. On the way back, he stopped at the repairer's narrow shop on Rue des Lombards, where umbrella ribs hung like a mobile of birds with patience. He paid the man again for the screw he had persuaded. Too much, a courtesy fine men pay to artisans when they are carrying other people's afternoons, and said only, "It turned in the end." Old metal remembers, the repairer said. It lets itself be polite once more, and then it goes stubborn again. He looked at the inspector's face and did not ask what this had to do with anything that might be written down. At the bank, the manager with the photographs in frames was not available. His tie had other obligations. The porter came instead and scrubbed a hand over the brass until his face showed in it. He went home early, the porter said, and meant the nephew. I think he intends to be useful somewhere where use means standing near a person who is not useful. He carried no umbrella. That is good, Maigret said. They argue. The shoemaker in the Marais straightened from his last and wiped his hands on a rag that had given up being clean. He read without reading, the man said, not waiting to be asked again. He stood with the paper open and looked at the space between items. I knew a man like that once. He also dried his shoes and thought he was staying. And he paid exact, Maigret said. Exact is a way of closing a door, the shoemaker said. Not slamming. It is a good door. By noon, he had no new facts, which is a kind of peace. He walked to the Pont Marie and stood at the parapet without going down the steps. A gull worked the same patch of air as yesterday with a sense of obligation. The river was a colour one associates with work clothes. If you looked too long, you saw nothing. If you let your eyes be lazy, you saw too much. Back at the quay, Janvier had placed a form on his desk, the sort that asks a man to name something that refuses it. Missing person, it suggested. Presumed voluntary disappearance, it encouraged. Maigret filled the lines with his honest handwriting that never looked quite official. He put nothing in the space for cause but a dash. He added a note to the margin for the file that was not properly a note. Window not opened 3 mornings. Coat and hat fished. Letters gone to where they belonged. Umbrella given to the rain. He did not sign the last line with his name. He signed the proper place and let the rest be a sentence that would live in the drawer and not trouble statistics. He sent Janvier to return the coat to the bed, because beds deserve their belongings, and to tell the concierge to leave the bolt alone until a new tenant gave it a different touch. He told Janvier to thank the fisherman with a cigarette, and the barman with a nod, and the seamstress with a spool of better thread than the navy she had used. Small settlements with a city that had been cooperative without meaning to. Le Marin? Janvier asked. Let him spend his coins at the same tabac, Maigret said. He'll be useful to some other afternoon that wants to go where it can't be followed. There was nothing left to tidy. He sat with his pipe unlit and listened to the radiator negotiating with the damp. Lognan came to the door and stayed on the threshold, with his gloom held like a parcel that might leak. You have nothing, Lognan said, resentful that a case could end in weather. No body, no charge, no statement that makes a headline. I have a window that stayed shut, Maigret said. Sometimes that is enough to tell you what a man was doing. What was he doing? Lognan asked. But it was a question for argument, not learning. Keeping his word to himself, Maigret said, and Lognan made a noise that could mean anything and went away. The afternoon flattened. He sent the nephew a line on a piece of paper without a heading. Do not be an umbrella, be a coat rack. They hold things up without asking to open them. He addressed nothing. The porter would know where it belonged. For Léonie he wrote nothing. The parcel had said enough, and the umbrella would say the rest on days when Paris sent its wet. He struck a match finally and drew the first comfortable smoke of hours, which had a steadiness to it that felt like soup. Before leaving for Boulevard Richard Lenoir, he walked to the window and put 2 fingers to the blind and lifted it a little. The river took no notice, and that was the kindness of it. He considered opening the window, perhaps out of sympathy with a man he had not known and now would not, and then did not. Some windows, once they have kept a promise, deserve to be left alone. He walked home. The boulevard had more lights than it needed. The wet made mirrors of the cobbles, and in them men in hats doubled themselves and then undoubled around the corners. Upstairs, the smell of stew had matured into certainty. Madame Maigret put down the ladle and looked at him the way doctors look at patients and wives look at husbands and detectives look at rooms. Well, she asked. It is finished in the way such things finish, he said. He sat, and she put bread in front of him, and he tore it and let the crumbs make a small disorder he would ignore until the end of the meal. He wanted Monday, he said. He made do with Sunday. That is what life is, she said, making do with a day that isn't the one we chose. She poured him a glass, and herself one she would only sip. You have your phrase now, she added, half teasing, half tender. He smiled in that broad, slow way his face had when it was given permission. After they had eaten, he brought his cup to the window and opened the kitchen latch a finger's width, letting the rain scent find its way to the rim. He did not stand long. He shut it again gently, as if an old habit had been disturbed and must be smoothed back. They sat a while without talking, the way people do, who have learned not to make every silence work. Before bed, he wrote one last line in his pocket notebook, which was for himself and no one else. Some cases are a weather report, low pressure, scattered promises, a man gone out without his hat. He closed it, put the pipe away, and let the dark step in with the steadiness of the river when no one is watching. In the street below, someone laughed once and then remembered the rain and went in. The city settled around him, and tomorrow, which had made itself useful to everybody, folded itself quietly, like a letter returned to its envelope, and stayed where it was.